Hey Jay, how you doing
Sounds like
today?
good. How are you, dear? Sounds like you're coming from Beckley, West Virginia. I don't know.
Yeah, I am coming from Beckley. Does it sound bad?
No, it sounds great.
Okay, good. I'm coming from Beckley. Yeah, live from Beckley
Yeah.
here. All right, so the last time we spoke, we covered a lot of material.
Yes, we did.
As a short recap, we went all the way from the end of your career, your playing career in West Virginia University, and we took it all the way to the beginnings of you and Tony Caridi and your
Right.
partnership. Okay.
Right.
So that's a great place to start. I know that we mentioned I asked you what was your first impression of Tony Caridi, and you told me he was very professional right off the bat.
Yeah, he was, Dave. And I think one of the things is he's so well prepared, but more than anything else, he's a great writer. And he scripts a lot of stuff out in his prep. And it's you could tell on broadcast that he just flows right with it. And so that makes him a good announcer. I think one of the things is the difference that I had to learn was between with Tony was radio and TV. And there is a difference there. In TV, Tony gives me more of a we're more of a conversationalist between the two of us because you as a viewer can see what's going on. So it doesn't have to be described dribble by dribble, pass by pass, because you can see it.
Right.
And so we interact a lot. So that we hit that off pretty good early when we started doing these games. And it just was a natural to us. And now after 30 plus years, we're now ending up in the radio end of it. And it's a different thing because in the radio end of it, I become a secondary role in this because I'm more like his sidekick because
Right.
I'm the guy that just jibber jabbers every once in a while. But I'm his sidekick because he has to paint that picture. He's got to take that. He's got to take that ball. He's got to take that play because you're listening to it instead of watching it, and that becomes a big thing. But we adjusted to that pretty well, and I think that he is very good taking care of. He's an individualistic, in my opinion, broadcaster because he has every dribble, he has every pass, and he can mix those words in to make it go for him. And then I can just add what I need to do, but it comes over on radio.
You know what I've noticed about your guys' broadcasts, and I've been listening for a long time, but there's very few mistakes as far as these players' names and the coaches and like the history of the game. And honestly, I watch a lot of ESPN too when West Virginia's playing, and there's mistakes just flying all over the place, and it's forgivable because I don't expect every announcer to know everything, but I'm always surprised how well you and Tony have kind of smoothed things out.
Well, I think what's happened there is we both prepare.
Right.
And so I got to be ready for everything. And I think I told the story in the last segment about Jack Fleming at down to Virginia Tech.
Yes.
And that taught me a lot because it taught me I better be prepared for almost anything. But Tony is very good at giving stuff off when it's time to get off. And he's also very good. I have to get in and out on radio, Dave, in about 8 seconds. That's all I have. So I better know what I'm talking about if I'm going to go in on something, whether it's percentage as a foul shooter, who's at the line, is
Hmm.
he a good offensive rebounder, is he a good defensive rebounder, and then go with the situation that's on the floor. I can't make stuff up because it just doesn't work.
Does Tony give you a cue when that happens, or do you guys just have this figured out over the years?
No, it's amazing how many times Tony or I have said, "I was just going to say that, partner,"
Right.
because
Right.
thinking the way I was thinking, and it just comes out that way. And so it's been very, very good and very positive in our broadcast. And I think the people enjoy that. That's why you get the TV version and that you get that you were talking about earlier is a lot different because I spend a lot of time at practice. Tony works, so he doesn't attend as many practices.
Right.
So he relies on me to bring all that little side stuff to it. And so it just worked out together as a nice combination for both of us.
Yeah. Well, I get the sense. Well, I don't get the sense, but I've heard several times, and Tony alludes to it every once in a while, that he was a Syracuse grad.
Yeah, he went to school at Syracuse.
Okay, so as he's coming into the fold at West Virginia University, was there any part of you that was kind of like, what am I doing working with this guy from Syracuse?
No, not at all, Dave.
That's
That
good.
never ever, that's
That's
a
good.
question that has been asked several
Uh-huh.
times of me, but the same answer, no. It was never like that at all. Because Tony is such a professional
Hmm.
that that's the way he does things. And that's the way he brought things to the table. And so when we started working together, it was nothing about Syracuse. Just that every once in a while, he said he went to Syracuse for his graduate, and it just left it there at that.
So when you and Tony are calling a game, I know you all are fans of the team. Obviously, you can't help but to be a fan, and you've got a long history with West Virginia. But as you're calling the game, is it ever tempting to let emotions get involved? And do you feel that, or are you so focused on the game that you aren't really absorbing the highs and lows of the game?
Well, I think you asked the question, you answered it at the same time, because really, Dave, it's an emotional thing because we do work for West Virginia. We are West Virginia fans when we do these games. However, you want the listener to be able to get a true perspective of what's going on in the game. And one thing that I have always let Tony do in the last maybe 5 or 10 years we were together on an emotional type game, uh, the last, and I just, a game comes to mind is the West Virginia Kentucky game in Syracuse back in 2010 that took us to the Final Four.
Right.
And there was about a timeout with 20 seconds that West Virginia was going to win that game. And I said to Tony when we came back on the air, make this the greatest final call you've ever made. And I said to him, and then I got away and he took it down the stretch. And but he's always conscious of wanting to make that last call. And on radio, he is the guy. And so you've got to be able to drop down and let that happen. Put your ego aside. It's very easy when a shot goes in. I know when we played in '98 out in Boise, Idaho, against Cincinnati, and Jared West made that bank shot at the end to win the game. Well, I went crazy. I jumped out of the seat, ran down on the floor. I completely lost. But Creedy was up there by himself. So, I mean, those things happen a lot. But most of the time, he has taught me to be very professional about what we need to do because the broadcast is what we're bringing to everybody. So whether you're in Beckley or somebody's in Meadow Bridge or wherever they are, Wheeling, West Virginia, we want to give those people the best that we've got.
You were speaking of that game where West hit the three to win, to make it to the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
I was traveling with my parents. I don't remember how old I was, probably 9 years old, and I was listening to the radio broadcast. And when he hit the shot, I kind of did the same thing you did. I kind of jumped up and down and started screaming.
Yeah.
I actually got in a little bit of trouble because I was in the back of the car and I made quite the scene back there.
I bet it was. I
Yeah.
bet it was very tricky as your parents were trying to drive there at the same time. Of course, they're fans too. So
Yep.
you got everybody screaming and yelling and having a good time. But that was a happy time. It really was.
That was a good one. That was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And speaking of big basketball moments, we mentioned this last time we spoke, but I wanted to get deeper into this because you said that you have known all the coaches. And we spoke about Gail Catlett to a degree last week, and we sort of touched on John Beeline. But let's go into those years with Beeline coming in, what you thought initially, and were you surprised at the progress we quickly made?
Well, I was surprised at the end because there's no doubt about it. Gail and I had been pretty close. We had the radio show. I had done his games. And yet, when he retired, that left an emptiness with me because I didn't know what was coming. And then they announced John Beeline, and I was at the press conference. But really, Dave, I didn't know anything about him.
Right.
And what he did, he brought a program that he had from Richmond that he had before at Lemoyne College in Syracuse. And then he brought that to West Virginia. And he changed everything because he really elevated West Virginia basketball from that standpoint. He's a very good coach. He's a very good fundamental coach. And he's more offense with his passing and he's cutting. And he had names for everything. He had a play called Buffalo. He had another, he had names for all these plays. But what we had was a nucleus of a team. And he really struck it rich because we had a guy named Joe Alexander was here where I live in Frederick, Maryland. He had no scholarship. He played at a small high school. So he ended up going to a prep school at Fork Union. And he was down there at Fork Union. And our assistant coach under Beeline, he was trying to get players because we were trying to bring players in. And on the same day, we hit it because we got Deshaun Butler out of New Jersey to accept a scholarship.
On the same day?
Almost, or if it wasn't, it was very, very close.
Wow. That's a good time period.
Following him real quickly was Wellington Smith. So those were two guys who were the nucleus. And then Alexander came in, and he was down, and Neubauer had gone down to look at another player. And when he went down to the prep school, to the military school to see Joe, because that was the only scholarship, Joe wasn't playing. He was like on the end of the bench, but Jeff went to practice. And he saw stuff in practice that he just couldn't believe. So he called Coach and said, Coach, I need to stay another day because I think we have a kid here you might want to take a hold of. So I think the way the story goes is John accepted on Jeff's recommendation, Joe Alexander, and he came to Morgantown. But one of the key things of this is John did not have a point guard. And so next move, they couldn't find one. And they had one named Tyler Ralph, but he was up from New York. And John liked him a lot, but he was a year from coming to West Virginia. He was Mr. Basketball in New York. So they needed a point guard for that year. And so he went on, and Jeff went down to Houston, Texas. And there on an outdoor court, he found a kid named J.D. Collins. Man. And J.D. Collins was amazing. Yeah. He just was a guy. He wasn't a scorer, but he knew how to run an offense. And he was a tough kid, and he defended well. And he came up and ran the show for John the first year. So meanwhile, John had his son, Patrick. He had a guy named Joe Hairbear who was a recruit from Richmond, from Germany, who never saw Morgantown and came to Morgantown sight unseen. And then you had Wellington and you had Deshaun Butler. So that you had a nucleus. So the point guard was J.D. Collins. But J.D. really, at the end of the first year and into the second year, Tyler Ralph came into Morgantown, and I don't know to this day whether it was a guarantee he was going to start or what, but he sort of was put in there pretty quickly. And by Christmas, I remember walking into the Coliseum with JD, and JD says, Jay, I'm not starting tonight. And JD and I went in and sat down, and I said, you're not sitting down. And he said, no, I'm not sitting down. He said, I know that with this situation, I'm not going to be able to play because I'm not going to start. And I said, JD, let me tell you something. Make sure that when you get into the game, they never, ever replace you. Play as hard as you can, as well as you can. And that's the true story. JD did get into the game and never left the starting lineup again.
I remember during that time period being totally shocked at how well West Virginia could shoot the ball because I just hadn't experienced it. And with guys like Gansey and Pittsnogle and Hairbear and just all these guys kind of happening at one time, to me, it was one of the more exciting periods of West Virginia basketball because it felt like once we got into tournament time, we seemed to have a knack for getting hot and just like hitting all of our shots all of a sudden.
Well, that's partly due to John and his offense, the way he ran it. He took somebody like Kevin Pittsnogle, who was a recruit of Catlett's. But John brought him, Gale recruited Pittsnogle out of Martinsburg, and but then Gale left, and then John brought Pittsnogle in. Now Pittsnogle was a great outside shooter, Dave, but also he could do some other things. But his favorite sport was bowling and eating pizza. He didn't care about anything else. But when he got on the floor, he was very, very good. And you mentioned another one, Mike Gansey, who's now assistant general manager of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah.
And what a player he was. And he was a transfer that John found from St. Bonaventure. He came in and sat out. And Mike told me one day, he said, you know, Jay, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, is sit out a year in basketball. I've never done it. And when he came back very, very strong. And if I don't know if you remember a game out in Cleveland, but we played against Chris Paul and Wake Forest, and Chris Prosser was coaching at Wake Forest. He was a West Virginia, Pittsburgh guy, played at coached at Wheeling Central. And Skip was a guy who just thought he had everything. And he thought he had everything you needed to be a winner. And that was a great game in Cleveland. It went overtime. And Gansey had 26 points in that game. He was terrific in that game. And I remember walking out to the bus with Skip, because I had known Skip from the old state tournament days. And Skip was really down. And he said, walk with me to our bus, Jay, because we're done. And on the way out, he said, I really thought that this was the team that could go all the way. My team was really good. He said, you guys were just better today.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to listen to the Mike Gansey Driveway Dreamer story?
No, I haven't. I saw it, but I haven't done it yet. I want to do it. But he's just a super kid. And the last year, I don't know, his senior year, he had, before games, he lost a lot of weight, Dave, because he was just, I don't know if it's a nervousness in his body, but it ended up being a disease that ended up when he was with the Miami Heat that he got, and it really hurt him and took him out of pro ball. But he was a talented player. He was a hard player. I saw one of the greatest steals I've ever seen. We were playing UCLA at the Pauley Pavilion, and the game was close. And Farmar, that guard for them, was coming up the floor. And Gansey made a great steal. And Farmar didn't even know that Gansey was by him with the ball. He was dribbling air. It's so vivid to me to remember that play, because Farmar doesn't know what happened. And Gansey's going down and laying it in. But those are a couple stories on a great, great player.
So as time passed, and then word came down that Beilein was going to move on to Michigan, what was your initial thoughts?
I wasn't really upset because of what John had done. John had been talking, first of all, to North Carolina State. And I'll give John credit on this, but North Carolina State was ready to hire him. And the reason I know that is because Pat and I were close friends. And Pat called me one day, the season was over, and he called me here at my home in Frederick. And he told me, he said, Dad's going to leave. And there were rumors, but he's down now talking to North Carolina State about that job. Well, I'll make a long story short. They came back, but they didn't offer it to him because of the buyout that John would have had to pay, because he wasn't let go by West Virginia.
Right.
And the buyout was pretty high, and he couldn't buy it out. So he called North Carolina State to ask them if they could take care of the buyout. And they couldn't, because they were paying off 2 football coaches at that time, and they couldn't do it. So John had to come back. But I'll give him credit on this. He came back with a guy named Frank Young, a point guard named Darius Nichols. And he had those guys, and we won the NIT that year. And he was a terrific coach. But then at the end of that year, Michigan was talking to him, and by that time it was pretty much done deal that he was going to leave.
Yeah, this is always interesting to me that West Virginia, for whatever reason, and I think maybe we've gone away from that now because the Big 12 is such a big name. But I've always been curious as to why West Virginia still seems like a little bit of a stepping stone to a bigger program. Because if I look at NC State or Michigan or West Virginia, to be honest, they all seem pretty comparable. They're all in Power 5 conferences. They all pay pretty well, and they all are on television all the time. I'm not sure why someone would view West Virginia as a downgrade from one of those positions.
Well, I don't think they do now, and you mentioned that. I don't think that, but let's step back and take a look at this because I thought John, in my opinion, John Beeline, was coming to Morgantown not to stay. That was not where his home was going to be. He thought he had other aspirations, especially as he built this program up. He became more, he became more and more. I don't know. His attitude changed a lot. You got to remember the football coach of West Virginia then was a guy named Rich Rodriguez.
Absolutely.
And he was controlling everything, Dave, from everything. He got whatever he wanted. And John couldn't quite get what he wanted. So I think that helped lead John to go find greener pastures.
Yeah. Well, he definitely has had a nice career since he left. He was really good at Michigan. Yeah.
Yep. What Hugs had wanted was this job years earlier, and he didn't get it. And I'm not sure. You'd have to check the records on this. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say stuff I'm not supposed to say.
Sure.
Or not sure of. But I'm thinking that that's when they hired John Beeline instead of Hugs. But I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure if that's the way it happened. But the next time around, some people in West Virginia who were good friends of Hugs said, if you don't take it this time, they're never coming back to you.
Yeah.
So Eddie Passlong was instrumental in this. And this was the best thing that really happened to us because Hugs was to West Virginia. And we've only had, in my opinion, two coaches who really didn't want to make Morgantown their final resting place. One, John Beeline. Two, Bucky Waters back in the 60s. And because he was on his way to Duke and he had bigger aspirations. And John I don't know if John just didn't think Morgantown was the answer or what. But Hugs, Gail Catlett, those guys, they are true West Virginian guys. And those guys were not going anyplace. Gail Catlett was not going to coach anyplace else. Yeah. That's for sure. And Bob Huggins is not going to coach anyplace else.
As a fan, that's always, I appreciate that more than anything, knowing that someone's not just trying to use you as a step.
Yep, that's very, very true. And one thing that I've noticed about Hugs, he really has a heart for everybody that he brings into the program. And no matter who it is, he cares about them. And I mentioned in another segment how he's so tough in practice. His practices are 3 hours long. And that's a funny thing because during those practices, there's all kind of snacks and stuff out on the scoring table where the managers are. There is beef jerky, there's chewing gum, there's 4 kinds of peanuts, there's everything that you could possibly want. So coaches are coming by just eating that stuff all the time, all kind of drinks. And I'll tell you what, you can get very, very heavy at that. But the players, the looseness, I think one thing with Gail, with Hugs now is the fact, I think, Dave, that now he gives a lot more authority to his assistant coaches. Mm-hmm. Those are guys that are really keys. They're the backbone of what happens in practices to start. All the drills, all the fundamentals, all the scouting reports. And then Hugs is the guy that oversees it all and comes in with different authorities. And when he is coaching, when he's out on the floor coaching at any practice, he's into it, man. So that it's a big game.
Let's go back a few years because one of the most interesting time periods during Huggins' career at West Virginia, by far, and I think this is kind of what put us on the map nationwide even more so. And every time I read that a transfer is coming into West Virginia or a recruit, they always mention this, and it's Press Virginia. Mm-hmm. That time period was kind of shocking. Not that I didn't think Huggins would come up with something that good, but it blew my mind how quick we made the turnaround from one of those kind of bad seasons.
Well, Dave, he looked over his roster in the summer of that year.
Mm-hmm.
Saw he had a real super athlete in Daxter Miles.
Mm-hmm.
So he had that as a start. And then, of course, he had Carter out there too, who was just tenacious on defense and was so quick and so good. So I think he knew he wanted to do something from a press standpoint. But Hugs is a guy that will not sit on his own laurels and try to figure it out himself. He went out to a guy that was up in Cleveland. I think his last name was Mackey. And he had this zone press. And Hugs brought him in, David, and then went to a point and said, this is our personnel. Can we do this? And right away, he said, it's worth a shot because you've got the two guards out there that are really going to get after it on defense. And this was all done mostly man to man. It was jump switching. There was a lot of double teaming. But if you look on ball defense, a lot of the steals that Javon Carter had, it'd be like me guarding you, and you would just clean my clock. I mean, I would be dribbling. I would try to protect the ball, but he was so tenacious and his hands were terrific.
Yes.
And Dax was just a super athlete that could make plays. So you put those two together and you had the formation of the team that they had there. And then it became a very, very good basketball team.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember we were watching a game several years ago during the Press Virginia time period. Yeah. And I remember thinking out loud that we were down by 7 or 8. And I was thinking in my mind, if we can just steal the ball 4 times in a row and score real quick, we'll be fine. And then I thought about that later on. I was like, never in the history of watching basketball can I remember a team and giving it legitimate thought, can we steal the ball 4 times in a row real quick? And we could.
Well, that's the point. What you're making is really true because you said it because, yes, you believed that you could. And that was a big thing. But if I regress a little bit and go back, this is how our era in 1957, 58, 59, Fred Schaus went down to West Virginia Tech and found a coach by the name of Neil Bizey, and he came up with these zone presses, and he brought it back up. And the great thing about that was that West didn't have a lot of steals. A lot of steals went to Renton and Bolliard, Bobby Joe Smith. But the long arms and the long arm span in double teams was led by Jerry because Jerry would get in a double team, and he never fouled, Dave. He never fouled. I'm not saying never, but very seldom would he ever get into a foul. Same way with the other guys double teaming. They knew how to double team. And I think this came forward and to the era of Press Virginia when it happened because, we beat Virginia and we went to Charlottesville and beat Virginia. And that very seldom happens with Tony Bennett because that just doesn't happen down in Charlottesville.
They're tough.
Yeah, it was. And it was Carter. And I've seen so many plays. Javon never gave up on a play. And that's a big thing right there.
The year that Oklahoma had Trae Young.
Yes.
And I was watching this guy score 25, 30 points during the first 15 games of the season. And I remember thinking, if anyone can stop him, it should be our team. And I remember a couple of games that year, Javon was on him, and he got into foul trouble. And I still was like, well, now we're going to put Daxter Miles on him, and we're still okay.
Yeah.
And we were because both of those guys could stay in front of a guy just relentlessly.
Dax wasn't a great practice player, but he was a hell of a game player.
Really?
I'll tell you, when he put the uniform, because Dax, he took some time off. Carter never took it off. But those guys were buddies, and they really ended up being a solid backcourt. Yeah. But I remember Dax when we were in San Diego and we played Marshall in the second game.
Hmm.
And they thought that'd be a great game and everything like that because they had John Elmore and
Hmm.
they had Jared West 4 years ago, and he was just a freshman, and he was good. But wow,
It was
I mean
ugly.
that game, oh, it was ugly. John Elmore with that pressure from Javon Carter. I never felt sorry, but I just thought he's not going to be able to make a play. He threw the ball in the stands. He hit the officials with it. He did everything.
It
I
looked
mean, it
like a
was just
circus. Yeah.
it did. It
Yeah.
did because we had those two guys, and defensively, they were just too strong, too
And that
good.
was second round of the NCAA tournament too. I
Yes,
hadn't seen a game that ugly. I mean, normally that happens in the first 2 or 3 games of the year, and then it's
yeah.
kind of over for that kind of stuff.
But it's not because it was Marshall. It's just because it would have been anybody that
Yep.
would have had guards like that. They were in trouble if their best players were guards because our guards were so much better.
Yeah, definitely. And then we had that length with Jonathan Holton, where like a Nate Adrian, that
Yeah.
always helped a lot. I remember Nate Adrian is one of my favorite Mountaineers of all time
Yes.
because this guy got all the 50-50 balls. He was always, no matter what happened, I was like, he's going to come out of that dog pile with the ball in his hands. I
Well,
just
it's
love
funny
that about him.
because oh yeah, and I think another thing with Nate is that Nate didn't really step into being somebody until midway of his junior year, and
Right.
then his senior year was great. But I think that we would have been out and where were we playing where we lost to Gonzaga?
I don't
Uh,
remember what town we were in. I remember the game very well.
yeah, and we should have won that game, but Nate Adrian played that full game with a rotator cuff, and
Wow.
he couldn't lift that arm up over his shoulder. And there was a steal at the end of the game by Carter down in the corner, and he whipped the ball in a wide open layup, and Nate couldn't get the ball up to the rim because of the shoulder. And that's not the reason we lost the game, but
So it
that
doesn't
was a
help. Yeah.
could have sent us on its way. Yeah.
The Best Virginia team came to Beckley a couple years ago and did an
Yeah.
exhibition.
Yeah.
And after the game was over, they stood around the court, and it was Jay-Sean Page and Deshaun, and I'm trying to remember who
Tariq.
else was on the team. Tariq and all these guys. They just kind of hung out and let the fans
Yeah.
approach them and talk to them. And I spoke to all the players, and they were all just so much. There was so much generosity, and they just like talked to us for as long as we wanted to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
And you could tell they were so proud to still have ties to West Virginia.
Oh, yeah. Because I'll tell you how you can put this in perspective. Those guys are all that you mentioned. All those guys are overseas. We'll add Alex Ruoff and Kevin Jones and those guys.
Right.
They still every summer come back and do their workouts in a practice facility. And that's the one thing that makes Bob Huggins as proud as that facility as he ever, because it's a place where ex-players can come back, guys that are playing in Europe or wherever they're playing, and they all come back and they all work out all summer long there.
That's incredible.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's a pretty unique situation. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I spoke to you off camera a couple weeks ago, and you mentioned we were talking about Huggins and his love for the state and for the people of the state.
Yes.
And in correlation with West Virginia basketball. And every time Hugs is on the air, whether it's a halftime, like a little snippet during halftime, or whether it's like the coach's show, you just really get a sense of how much this guy cares about the program and how much he cares about the state. And you mentioned a trip that you took at his behest a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, I think that it might have been Hugs' first year. And we had a post-game show after the game. I would come out of the bottom floor of the Coliseum. I'd come upstairs, and I worked with a guy named Kyle Wiggs, and we did a talk show. And the people would call in. And it was mainly set up because the traffic was so heavy going out of the Coliseum. It was someplace where we got a lot of listeners, but we got a lot of listeners throughout the state. And Kyle would always say, "Where are you calling from, Dave? Where are you calling from, Joe?" And they would say like, "Oh, we're down here in Pendleton County, or we're down here in Marlington, oh, I'm over here at in Wheeling, wherever it would be. And they named some of these towns that I had heard of, but Dave, I'd never been to.
Right.
So I came home and I said something to my wife. I said, you know what, Bonnie, we need to some way just put all this together and maybe take a trip. And she said, that's a great idea. So I went out to Hugs and I said, Hugs, this is what I wanted to do. Can you give me the equipment? So Bubba Schmidt was our equipment guy downstairs. He'd been there forever. And he set me up, and we had so much stuff, Dave, that we put in the back of our car, and we just took off. And one of the stories I told you off the air was had just been down in Cass, West Virginia, where the railroad is.
Sure.
There's an old general store down there, and some people came out, and we said hello to them, and we gave them a jersey and some stuff, and they were so happy. And we left and went down this road towards a town called Minnehaha, and it was a small little community. And my wife was driving, and she was driving the car. And I went by this farmhouse, but it was like up a path, and there was a gentleman sitting on the porch. And I asked her to stop the car. She backed it up, and I said, I'll be back in a minute. And she said, here, take some gear. He might want something. So I took a couple shirts and a cap, and I went up. And he was an old timer, and he was sitting there in a rocking chair just by himself, looking out at a great view out over the mountains of West Virginia. And I said to him, I introduced myself, and he said, are you kidding me? That was the first words. And he brought tears to his eyes, and he said, I have listened. He said, you have been my ears. You and your partner have been forever and ever. I've listened to games. I've never, ever been to Morgantown. I've never seen a football game. I've never seen a basketball game. And he actually brought tears in his eyes. And it still chokes me up. It's been 10 years. And really, I think, Dave, one of the things, that's the most rewarding thing that I think I've had in my career is to go and visit. We went to a town called Peterstown. We searched for the little towns.
My grandpa was born in Peterstown, actually.
Oh, he was?
He was.
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Then, Elizabeth. Then we swung down and we were up in White Sulphur Springs.
Sure.
And then slid over, went to Lewisburg, and then we worked our way down, and we ended up in Gauley Bridge. We ended up in Raynell. We ended up in Fayetteville. I loved Fayetteville. Fayetteville was really neat. And then we slid into Beckley. I remember, I can't remember where Tudor's biscuits.
Yeah.
I mean, we stuffed ourselves in those. Those were really good.
That's good stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and then we were down in Bluefield. We worked our way up the other side, up in the Ohio, coming up the Ohio River on the other side. But boy, what a great experience! I can't tell you how blessed I was to be able to do that.
So that was actually all your idea.
I don't know. I think that was partly my wife's idea too.
Oh, okay, so you got to give her credit.
Had the thought behind it, but I mentioned it to Hugs when I got back because he asked me one day. He said, "Hey Jay, how'd that trip go?" I said, "Well, we were gone about 7 days, Hugs," and I told him. He said, when we win the national championship, I'm going to rent a bus. I'm going to take that trophy, and I'm going to take it all the way through West Virginia. I said, Hugs, that's the best idea you could ever do. They would love it.
It would be. It would probably be the most exhilarated a West Virginia fan could ever be. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think that was a brilliant thing you did because West Virginia, I've always thought, although it's an entire state and there's 1.7 million people here, but the whole state really just feels like one community to me. It's not like the other states where there's like a suburb of this city and then this city and that connects to this city. It's West Virginia stands sort of alone and it is its own thing. So going to all these small towns, I think you really get to know the fan base. Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe some of the towns, what they were like. I remember going down outside of Bluefield. We went out and saw these old $1 million homes that were out there outside of town in Bluefield. And then we went up to Pipestem and came over the hill down into down along that river there. It went up
Hinton,
into
maybe.
Hinton. We ended up at Hinton, and then we came back and went up over the hill into Beckley, down
Yeah.
by Shade Spring and down in that way. So we had a great time. Yeah, we didn't fight at all. It was really good.
That is good. That is good. No fighting. That's good.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, no, I think that's awesome. I wish I'd known you were doing that. We could have met up and chatted basketball.
Well, you'd have been about 10 then.
Oh, 10 years old? Yeah, maybe. I'm 32 now. I'm 32.
Well, you've been early 20s.
Early 20s, yeah.
When we did it, yeah. And I don't know if I'd ever be able to do it again, but something I'll always remember.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I would be on the bus. We won the final. We won what Baylor won last night. We'd be on that bus. That's for sure.
Yeah. Oh man.
It's because I feel that way. It's just, it would be the fans' trophy, Dave. That's
Absolutely.
what it would be. That's why you'd want it. And that's why Hugs feels too. So that's what it would be. So it's really good.
I think if West Virginia, let's not say if, let's say when West Virginia wins a national championship, it will be sort of a never-ending celebration, because I think people here deserve it more than anywhere else. I'm partial, but I really do feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, you have to believe that we're going to get it done, and I just hope Hugs is around to see it. He's 68.
I do too.
But he's still got a lot of energy. He gets tired at the end of August when they've been through all the recruiting, but he really works very, very hard. I can't believe in my mind, and I'm sure this happened, but I can't believe that Mike Krzyzewski, Bill Self, and all these guys are working the way this guy does, because he's a hard worker.
Yeah.
He just doesn't know.
I will say about Huggins, just from what I know, that I really think, and this is not a knock to any player who's ever played for him, but the fact he's not in the Hall of Fame is just like disgusting, because I think if he got the level of recruits that these other coaches have had, I think he would have more than 1 or 2 national championships, and I really believe that.
Well, here's the thing. Let me ask you, why isn't he?
I have no idea.
The only thing everybody said, well, he's never won a national championship. But hell, there's been a lot of coaches who are in there never won a national championship.
And
so I'm not buying that.
I don't buy it either. Yeah.
I'm going to make a call. I think next year he's in.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, if you watch the games on ESPN right after it was released that he didn't make it on the ballot this year or whatever. Fran Fraschilla and a couple of other guys, they were just openly disgusted on the air.
Yeah. They were.
Huggins. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we all rightfully so. Yep, definitely. Well, let's hope they get him in there, and let's hope he can get that national championship before he retires, because I think he deserves it.
Oh, he does, Dave. I hope he gets it.
Yeah. Well, Jay, I think this is a good time to stop.
All right.
And it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, great talking to you, Dave.
And I really appreciate everything that you do for the program and everything that Tony does. And I'll be listening to every game.
Well, that's thanks.
All right. We'll see you next time. Okay.
All right, Dave. Thank you.